Hello and welcome to yet another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. If you're new to this is not a podcast. This is me on video talking about podcasting. Topic of conversation today is around marketing. What does it take to market your way to the top? And why should you do that? So there's been a lot of news in the last few days and weeks and months over around. As we know that podcasting is growing and people are pouring money into it. Some people are exiting the space from certain areas, focusing on new content. BuzzFeed just announced this morning, if you are very topical, that they have laid off or let go their entire podcasting arm, which sucks because I really liked reporting to you their quick morning show. But hey, it happens. Why did they cut it? Well, I'm assuming it had to do with revenue. How much revenue can these things actually bring in? And since most of my clients are business podcasters, and they're asking this hardcore question of what does it take to bring in an audience, one of the answers is marketing. You gotta bring in people, and you gotta spend money, in many cases, to get your audience there. Some don't. You can try the captured lightning in a bottle, but for the most successful things in life, take a little bit of marketing. There's $88 billion in digital advertising money spent last year, probably more than that this year. And some of that is spent on getting podcasts the audience they deserve. So I have for your edification a chart. And I'm going to walk you through this chart, but I need to set the stage here. So I spent almost 2 decades in digital advertising and marketing, either in or adjacent to the C-suite for marketing departments for big companies, or advertising agencies, both large and small. So I know this math in my head. And every time a client comes to me and says, we want to get something out of a certain amount of spend, I walk them through this very exercise. In fact, everybody does this in advertising if you know what you're doing, and it's not hard, and there's no secrets here. But you need to do a reality check. So that's what we're going to do, a reality check of what it takes to really market your way to the top. So, because this is look, I care about business outcomes. I care less about the outputs that get there. We have to work on the outputs. We're going to cover some outputs, but I wanted to start with an outcome we're looking for. And at the top of this chart over here, all these numbers that you see, and if you're listening to this because I have finally managed to make it into a podcast, relax. I'll coach you through this. So at the top of the number here, the top of the thing we're looking for, that business outcome we want, is we want revenues per month in the neighborhood of $5,000 from our podcast. How we get those how that revenue comes in, I don't really care. But the assumption here is that if we're going to bring in this revenue, the way it really works for this math, for this exercise, is to think about that from advertising. There's a lot of companies out there right now, Panoply, Stitcher, Podcast One, Wondery. Well, Panoply is Stitcher. Midroll. No, Midroll, Stitcher. I forget. Regardless, there's a lot of companies that will sell advertising. So let's take some math and figure that out. If we want to bring in $5,000 a month from advertising revenue, and we're going to assume that we get, best case scenario here, we're going to get a $25 CPM. That means cost per 1,000 downloads, right? That means we have to have, in that course of that month, 200,000 downloads. Simple math. You need 5,000 in revenue. You get you get $25 for every 1,000. You need 200,000 to get $5,000. 200,000 downloads needed to get to the $5,000 a month. Now the good news is you make 4 shows a month, so you really only need an audience of about 50,000 people. Hey, great. Epiphany number 1, to make $5,000 a month, which is a reasonable amount of money. It's not quit your day job money, but it is not let's start a brand new business money, but it is certainly you want to bring in $5,000 a month of revenue to my business. I'm going to pay attention. To do that, you need an audience for your podcast of 50,000 people. 50,000 devices downloading your content. Okay? Chances are, if you're listening to the show, you don't have 50,000. If you think that's an untenable goal, great. Just move the decimal point by 1. If you want to make $500 a month, you need 5,000 people downloading your content. Now, let's talk about how we get there. Because we know we need an audience of 50,000 or 5,000, but 50,000 in my example. How do we get there? Well, we're going to have to spend some money on advertising or marketing, spend some time on advertising or marketing, spend some money and or time on promotion. How do you couch what's going to be successful? Well, I'm going to put in some very extremely blue sky numbers. Very, very extremely blue sky numbers, and we'll see if you actually buy into what this is really, really telling you. Okay, to get 50,000 people, 50,000 conversions, we first have to look at, well, how many are actually going to convert? Because in order to convert, you have to click on something. You have to go somewhere. Well, we know that when people get to your web page that says, here's where you can become an audience of my show, only a certain percentage, and it's a small percentage, are going to do it. I have in my table here a best case scenario of 5%. That's aggressive. But let's say that 5% of the people that you send to your podcast page actually do click subscribe. 5%. That's too many, but I'm just going to say that. That means in order to get those 50,000 subscribes, you had to get 1 million clicks. 1 million clicks at a 5% conversion rate leads to an audience of 50,000. Now, that's getting somebody to click once they've been to the page. You have to put your message in front of them, whether that's Facebook, whether that's Twitter, whether that's Google Ads, whether that's a billboard on the side of the road. You have to get your message in front of somebody. Your advertisement, your promotion, your marketing message has to be in front of people. How many people? Well, again, we're going to assume a very high click-through rate of 5%. So if 5% of the people click through and you want to get 1 million clicks, and you know that only 5% of the impressions are going to click, that's 20 million impressions. Sounds like a big number. It's not a big number. It's a big number, but in the advertising world, it is a pretty relatively small number. You need 20 million impressions. And if you want to get advertisements, if you want to use advertisements to get there, if you want to pay for Facebook ads, if you want to pay for a Google AdSense campaign, Google AdWords campaign, or if you want to use Google's Display Network or billboards or whatever else you want to use to get your message out there, and you want to get 20 million impressions out, how much are you going to pay for that? Well, I use an extremely low conservative number of 50 cents. 50 cents per thousand. $10,000. $10,000. $10,000 to make $5,000. Now, you say, well, Evo, I'm not going to spend $10,000. I'm not going to pay for those. I'm just going to do it naturally through Twitter and through, word of mouth and email marketing campaigns. That's fine. Forget the number at the bottom, but don't forget the number above that. 20 million impressions. I don't care if you don't have to pay for them. If you want to get a monthly audience of 50,000 people, which is small in the overall advertising world, but you'd be in the top of all podcasts, but you'd be relatively low in the podcast advertising world. If you want that many, 20 million impressions. You're not going to get there with your Twitter account. Fascinating math, isn't it? And all of it's true. If you want the numbers, I'll email them to you. Contact me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro. If you want more information about how I help businesses think through this kind of stuff and launch podcasts that lead to measurable business outcomes, the top number is a measurable business outcome. Go to podcastlaunch.pro for more info. I'll be back tomorrow. I will be back tomorrow with another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers.